Sunlight pooled on the duvet like spilled honey. I watched the dust motes dance above Logan's chest while he slept. His breathing was heavy and rhythmic. My wedding ring felt like a cool, strange weight on my left hand. Then the vibration of my phone broke the silence. I slipped into the kitchen to answer. Efter our maridianj, the restaurant manager kalakadaman anxiety. Dui ready skd chescurity fiye. Why humanity to ch yourself? PAC com alan and don tell your usb and ananth. The tea in my mug went cold before I could take a sip. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. I stared at the teacher's guide on the counter. Logan had bought it for me months ago. He was always so thoughtful. He remembered every detail about my classroom. Now his kindness felt like a heavy fog. I watched him through the bedroom door. He shifted in his sleep. He looked like a man with a clean conscience. He was still wearing his watch. I dressed in the bathroom with the fan running. My hands shook as I tied my laces. I didn't apply any makeup. I wanted to be invisible. Logan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. He smiled that slow, honest smile. He asked where I was going so early. I told him I needed more milk for the morning. He kissed my forehead and told me to be careful. His skin felt like ice against mine. He watched me leave from the balcony. The restaurant parking lot was a gray desert. Heritage Bistro looked different in the daylight. The festive lights from last night were dark. Thomas Hale waited by the heavy oak doors. His face was etched with a deep, weary pity. He didn't offer a greeting. He just motioned for me to follow him. We walked past the empty tables and the stacked chairs. The air smelled of industrial bleach and stale wine. He led me into a cramped office at the back. The monitor flickered to life in the dim room. It showed the storage hallway near the kitchen. The timestamp read 9:40, 3 p.m. That was during our first dance. I remembered the music and the way Logan held me. On the screen, the door swung open. Vanessa walked in first, smoothing her dress. Logan followed her a second later. He didn't look back. He locked the door with a practiced click. They didn't speak. They simply moved toward each other with a terrifying hunger. I stopped breathing as the audio hissed into the room. Their voices were crisp and clear. Vanessa complained about the heat and the long ceremony. Logan laughed and pulled her close. He told her the condo would be theirs by the end of the month. He called me a lonely Mark who was desperate for love. He said my grandmother's house was the perfect prize for their patience. I watched him kiss her. I didn't cry. My heart simply turned into a stone. Thomas handed me a small silver flash drive. It felt scorching against my palm. I tucked it deep into my pocket and walked out. The afternoon sun was blinding. I drove to my parents' small apartment across town. My mother was folding laundry when I entered. She dropped a towel the moment she saw my face. My father came in from the porch. They knew. I sat at the table and placed the drive down. The video played on their old laptop. My father's breathing became ragged and loud. My mother began to sob into her apron. They watched the man they trusted plan to steal their daughter's legacy. Logan looked so comfortable while he lied. He spoke about the condo as if it were already sold. Father stood up to grab his keys. I reached out and caught his wrist. I told him we had to wait. My father wanted to confront Logan immediately. He wanted to throw his things into the street. I explained that a private fight would only lead to more lies. Logan would cry and beg. He would manipulate us until we doubted our own eyes. I needed the truth to be public. I wanted his parents to see him clearly. My mother wiped her eyes and looked at me. She saw a coldness she did not recognize. I returned to the condo later that evening. Logan was in the kitchen making pasta. The smell of garlic filled the air. He looked like the perfect husband in his apron. He asked if I found the milk I needed. I lied and said the store was closed for repairs. I sat down and watched him move. He was so graceful for a predator. He poured me a glass of wine. I didn't drink any. Logan mentioned the joint bank account again. He said it would make the mortgage payments easier. He touched my shoulder and smiled. I felt a surge of nausea, but I forced a nod. I told him I wanted a second party. I said the wedding felt too rushed. I wanted to thank our friends properly at the bistro. He laughed and called me sentimental. He agreed without a second thought. It was all too easy. I called the bistro the next morning. Thomas agreed to help me set the trap. We booked the same room for Saturday night. I spent the week acting like a blushing bride. I even texted Vanessa about her dress. She replied with heart emojis and fake praise. I felt like a ghost walking through my own life. Logan never suspected a thing. He was too busy dreaming of his payout. My lawyer was already drafting. Saturday arrived with a heavy gray sky. I dressed in the same white silk from our rehearsal. Logan complimented my hair and kissed my cheek. We drove to the restaurant in silence. He thought we were celebrating our future together. I could see Vanessa's car in the lot. She was wearing the necklace I gave her. My heart beat steady and slow. I reached into my clutch and felt the drive. The screen was waiting. The restaurant was packed with faces I used to trust. Laughter bounced off the walls as Logan took his seat. He looked like a king in his navy suit. Vanessa sat right next to him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. I stood by the projector and felt the hum of the machine. My pulse was a rhythmic drum in my ears. I tapped the microphone to get their attention. The room went silent. I smiled at my husband. I started with a toast about loyalty and deep secrets. Logan beamed at me, holding his glass high. He thought I was praising his devotion. Vanessa winked from the front row, her silver necklace shimmering. I signaled to Thomas in the back. The lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life. The first few images were staged wedding photos. People cheered and clapped for the happy couple. Then the video shifted to the dark storage room. A collective gasp echoed through the bistro. The footage was grainy, but the subjects were unmistakable. Vanessa's hands were all over my husband's chest. The audio cut through the room like a jagged blade. Logan's voice filled the air, mocking my teaching job and my loneliness. He detailed the plan to sell my grandmother's condo. The laughter in the room died instantly. Logan stood up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. Logan's parents stared at the screen in total horror. His mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. I watched the color drain from Logan's face. He looked at me and tried to step forward. I didn't move an inch. Vanessa tried to hide her face behind her clutch. The betrayal was playing on a loop behind me. Every word of their conspiracy was louder than the last. The room felt smaller. The air was thick with shame. Logan shouted for Thomas to turn it off. Nobody moved to help him. My father stood near the door like a silent sentry. He blocked the only exit with his arms crossed. I pulled the wedding ring off my finger. It felt like shedding a layer of dead skin. I dropped the gold band into Logan's wine glass. The splash was tiny, but everyone heard it. I told him the marriage was a lie. He looked truly pathetic. The guests began to stand and move away. It was as if Logan and Vanessa were contagious. His own father told him to leave and never call. Vanessa tried to apologize, but her voice was a thin whine. I handed Logan a manila envelope. It contained the divorce papers and a change of locks notice. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I told him he had 1 hour to clear out. He finally understood. I walked out of the bistro into the cool night. My parents followed me to the car in silence. I felt lighter than I had in years. The condo was still mine. My life was finally my own again. I looked at the moon and took a deep breath. Logan was a ghost now. Vanessa was a memory. I drove home and turned on all the lights. I saw a shadow moving inside my dark living room. I gripped the railing as I reached the 4th floor. The shadow in my window moved again. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't call the police yet. I reached into my bag for my heavy brass keys. The door was already slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my foot. The smell of grease and cigarettes hit me instantly. Logan was standing in the kitchen. He was holding my grandmother's old jewelry box. Though I knew the most valuable piece was already gone. He didn't look like the man I married. His eyes were bloodshot, and his suit was wrinkled. Yet he still stood with a predatory grace. He dropped the box on the counter with a loud thud. He told me he wasn't leaving without his share. I reminded him that everything in this house was mine. He laughed and stepped toward me. He said he had already signed my name on a loan. My stomach dropped. He had forged my signature months ago, using my school records. The room felt cold despite the summer heat. I realized he had been planning this since our first date. He needed my credit as much as my condo. I reached for my phone on the table. He swiped it away with a violent motion. He told me to sit down and listen. He wanted a payoff to disappear forever. I looked at the kitchen clock. My father was supposed to arrive in 10 minutes. I had to stay calm. I moved toward the sink to put distance between us. I noticed a small piece of paper on the floor. It was a receipt from a local pawn shop. He had already taken my grandmother's engagement ring. The one I thought was safe in the bank. I felt a surge of pure hatred. I told him he would go to jail for forgery. He leaned against the fridge and smirked. He said the police wouldn't believe a scorned, emotional wife. Logan started packing a duffel bag with my electronics. He was moving fast now, grabbing whatever had value. He told me Vanessa was waiting in the car downstairs. They were leaving the city tonight. I realized he didn't care about the divorce papers. He just wanted to strip the place bare before he fled. I glanced at the open door. I saw a flash of blue light reflecting off the hallway wall. The neighbors had called. The sirens grew louder in the street below. Logan panicked and ran for the back fire escape. He tripped over the rug and fell hard. I didn't try to help him up. I stood over him and watched him struggle. He looked small and broken on the floor. The police burst through the door with their lights flashing. My father was right behind them. He grabbed me and pulled me away from the chaos. Logan was finally in cuffs. They led him out in silence. The apartment felt empty and strange. I sat on the sofa and looked at my bare walls. My father stayed to help me change the locks. He found the pawn receipt and promised to get the ring back. I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I saw Vanessa's car speeding away in the distance. She had left him behind to save herself. The detectives stayed late to photograph the ransacked kitchen. I sat on a stool and watched the blue lights fade from the walls. My father finished installing the new deadbolt with a sharp, final click. He handed me the keys and told me to rest. I promised him I would be fine alone. The silence in the condo felt heavy and thick. I walked to the counter and picked up the empty jewelry box. My grandmother's legacy felt lighter, without her gold ring inside. The next morning brought a cold rain against the glass. I drove to the pawn shop using the crumpled receipt I found. The air inside smelled of dust and old metal. I showed the clerk the paperwork and the police report. He sighed and pulled a small velvet tray from the safe. My heart stopped when I saw the ring. It was missing the central diamond. Logan had pried the stone out to sell it separately. I held the broken gold band in my shaking hand. I spent the afternoon at the district attorney's office. They showed me the stack of forged documents Logan had created. He had used my school credentials to open 3 high-interest loans. The total debt was enough to sink my future for a decade. My lawyer told me we could fight the charges. However, it would take years to clear my name. I felt the weight of his greed crushing my lungs. I needed to find where he hid the cash. He was still refusing to speak. My phone buzzed with an unknown number while I was leaving. I answered and heard Vanessa's frantic breathing on the line. She sounded terrified and breathless. She told me Logan had hidden a bag in my classroom. He had used my spare key to enter the school on Tuesday. She said he was planning to frame me for the theft. I didn't say a word to her. I hung up and drove straight to the elementary school. The parking lot was completely empty. The school hallways felt eerie and hollow on a Sunday. My footsteps echoed off the lockers as I walked to my room. I unlocked the door and turned on the overhead lights. Everything looked normal at first glance. I checked the supply closet and the reading corner. Then I saw a floorboard that was slightly raised under my desk. I pulled it back and found a black duffel bag. It was stuffed with cash and the missing diamond. Logan had planned a final trap. I called the detective before I touched the bag. He told me to stay put and wait for backup. I sat in my small teacher's chair and looked at the drawings on the wall. My students had no idea their teacher was a target. I realized Logan wanted me to find this bag and hide it. He wanted to call an anonymous tip to the police. He was going to send me to prison from his cell. The cruelty of it made me laugh. The police arrived and processed the bag as evidence. They found Logan's fingerprints on the inside of the floorboard. This was the final piece they needed to prove premeditated fraud. I walked out of the school and felt the rain on my face. The debt would be erased because the crime was now fully documented. I drove back to my condo and made a pot of tea. I sat by the window and watched the city lights. My name was finally clean and quiet. The detective called me on Monday morning with an update on Logan. He had tried to blame the duffel bag on a local janitor. Nobody believed him after they found the diamond inside his school desk floorboard. The evidence was overwhelming and his legal team was already jumping ship. I felt a cold sense of justice settling in my chest like lead. My father arrived at noon to help me pack Logan's remaining boxes. We worked in a heavy silence that felt like a funeral. I found a second burner phone hidden behind the radiator. I turned the device over in my hand and saw a message icon. The screen was cracked, but the text was still legible and bright. It was a thread of messages between Logan and Vanessa from months ago. They hadn't just planned to steal my condo and my grandmother's ring. They were laughing about a previous victim in another state. My stomach lurched as I read the details of their past crimes. Logan was a professional who specialized in lonely teachers. I realized I was just a repeating line in his dark script. The realization made me feel foolish and small for a brief moment. I had believed our meeting at the bookstore was a stroke of luck. Now I knew he had scouted the location specifically to find me. He knew which guide I was looking for because he watched me. He had studied my life like a predator tracks its prey. I looked at the wedding photos sitting in the trash pile. The man in those pictures didn't exist and never had. He was a hollow mask made of lies. My father took the phone to the police station immediately after lunch. I stayed behind to scrub the floors until my knuckles were white. I wanted to erase every trace of his presence from my home. The scent of his expensive cologne still lingered in the hall closet. I threw out the spare linens and the pillows he used. I needed the air to be clean and empty again. Then I heard a soft knock at the door. I expected my father, but I saw Vanessa standing there instead. She looked haggard, and her expensive bride dress was now a wrinkled mess. She begged me to listen and tried to step inside the kitchen. I blocked the entrance with my arm and held my ground. She claimed she was also a victim of Logan's long, cruel games. She said he had threatened her family to make her help him. I looked at her silver necklace and remembered the storage room audio. She had been laughing while they planned to ruin me. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I told her that I knew about the previous victim in Ohio. Her face went pale, and she started to tremble with fear. I mentioned the burner phone and the messages we found that morning. She realized the police would be looking for her within the hour. She tried to offer me money to keep her name out. I laughed, because her greed was so predictable and so pathetic. I told her to leave before I called the precinct myself. She turned and ran down the stairs without looking back. I watched her from the balcony as she scrambled into her car. She was frantic and hit the curb while trying to reverse. I felt a strange sense of calm watching her fall apart. My life was finally coming back into my own control. I went back inside and finished mopping the living room floor. The sun was setting and the apartment felt peaceful and warm. I realized that my grandmother's house was still a safe fortress. It had survived the storm and so had I. My phone rang again. It was the district attorney, with news about the second burner phone. They had linked the messages to an unsolved fraud case in Dayton. Logan was now facing federal charges for interstate conspiracy and theft. He wouldn't be seeing the light of day for a long time. Vanessa was already being picked up by a patrol unit nearby. The house of cards had finally collapsed into a pile of dust. I thanked the lawyer and hung up the phone. I felt the first real smile in weeks. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the balcony. The city lights were beautiful and the air felt perfectly still. I looked at the empty space where Logan's shoes used to sit. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was a chosen, quiet strength. I had protected my legacy and my name from a monster. I was a teacher who had finally learned a hard lesson. I reached out and touched the brick wall of my home. I felt the hidden envelope taped under the railing. Logan had missed it. I peeled the tape back with trembling fingers. The hidden envelope was thick and heavy. I pulled out a set of official documents. My breath caught in my throat instantly. Logan had kept a detailed ledger of all his targets. My name was at the very bottom of the list. Beside my name was a date and a dollar amount. He had estimated my worth before he even spoke to me. I felt a cold wave of realization. I was just a line item on a ledger. The next page was a map of the city. Red ink circled my school and my favorite bookstore. He had tracked my daily routine for weeks. I saw a small photo of me clipped to the back. It was taken from across the street. I was laughing with a student at the time. The level of obsession was terrifying and deep. He wasn't just a thief, he was a hunter. I folded the papers back into the dark envelope. I felt watched even in my solitude. I heard the front door creak open downstairs. My father had returned with more packing tape. He saw the envelope in my lap. I showed him the ledger and the map. His face turned a deep shade of red. He grabbed his phone to call the lead detective. We had to turn this over immediately. This was the roadmap to all his previous crimes. It proved he was a serial predator. We walked toward the elevator together. The hallway felt longer than usual tonight. The precinct was buzzing with late night activity. Thomas, the bistro manager, was there giving a statement. He looked relieved to see us arrive. I handed the envelope to the detective. He spread the map out on his desk. He pointed to a small blue circle near the docks. He asked if I recognized the address. I shook my head no. He told me it was a storage locker. It was registered under a fake name Logan used. We drove there in a convoy. The storage facility was a maze of corrugated metal. The detective cut the lock with heavy shears. The door rolled up with a loud screech. Inside were boxes of jewelry and old electronics. I saw wedding dresses from different years. There were at least 5 of them hanging there. Each one represented a woman he had broken. I felt a profound sense of grief for them. They were my sisters in this nightmare. Then I saw a small, familiar wooden box. I reached out and opened the lid. It was the original gold setting for my grandmother's diamond. Even though the stone was recovered at the school, he had kept this mounting as a final trophy of our marriage. I looked at the empty gold setting in the wooden box. Logan had kept the mounting as a trophy. even though the stone itself was currently sitting in a police evidence locker at the station. The detective took the wooden box for evidence. I felt a sudden, sharp chill. We left the storage unit as dawn broke. The sky was a pale and bruised purple. My father drove me home in total silence. I stared at the wedding dresses in my mind. I wondered where those other women were now. Did they recover their lives or their homes? I hoped my story would help them find peace. I was the one who finally caught him. The teacher had finally closed the book on him. But the ledger had one more page. I returned to the condo and sat down. I looked at the very last page again. There was a name written in light pencil. It was Vanessa's name, circled in black ink. Underneath it was the word next, with a question. Logan was planning to betray his partner in crime. He was going to steal her share too. They were never actually a team. They were two sharks in a very small tank. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. I scrubbed the floors until my back ached. I wanted the smell of him gone forever. I replaced the curtains in the bed sheets. My home was becoming a sanctuary again. I looked at the empty space on the wall. I would hang my own art there now. I was no longer a mark or a target. I was a woman who had survived a war. My life was my own to build. I lay in bed and listened to the rain. The divorce was moving through the courts fast. Logan was trapped behind bars for a decade. Vanessa was facing her own dark future. I closed my eyes and breathed in deep. The air was clean and cold and honest. I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. It was the sound of my own freedom. I was finally alone and I was finally safe. My grandmother would have been very proud. The legal proceedings moved with a cold and efficient speed. Logan stayed behind bars, while the evidence grew into a mountain. I sat in the courtroom and watched him refuse to meet my eyes. He looked small without his expensive suits and practiced smiles. The judge read the list of charges with a flat voice. It included forgery, grand larceny, and felony fraud. My lawyer squeezed my hand as the final verdict was reached. Logan would not be coming back for a very long time. Vanessa took a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentence. She gave up the names of two other accomplices in exchange for leniency. I watched her being led away in handcuffs, through a side exit. She looked older and far more fragile than the woman at my wedding. I felt no satisfaction in her fall. I only felt a strange sense of exhaustion. The debt collectors finally stopped calling my phone at night. My grandmother's diamond was back in my possession at the bank. I returned to my classroom on a bright Monday morning. The school felt different now that the secrets were gone. My students greeted me with handmade cards and sticky hugs. They didn't know about the duffel bag or the hidden floorboard. I looked at the spot under my desk and felt a shiver. The floorboard had been nailed back down, but the memory remained. I focused on the lesson plan and the sound of children laughing. Their innocence was a balm for my tired and weary soul. The divorce papers arrived in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. I signed them on the kitchen table where we once ate pasta. The ink felt permanent and right under the soft kitchen light. I was no longer Flora Pierce. I was simply Flora again. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the balcony. The city was quiet and the air smelled like rain. I looked at the wedding photos one last time before burning them. The fire was small but very bright. My father called to check on me every single evening. He wanted to make sure the new locks were holding firm. I told him I felt safer than I had in years. The condo was a fortress built on my grandmother's hard work. I began to renovate the second bedroom into a library. I filled the shelves with books that Logan had never touched. Every object in my home now belonged only to me. I was finally the sole author of my own quiet story. I went to the bookstore where we first met last Saturday. I sat in the same aisle and drank a coffee. A man approached me and asked for a book recommendation. He had a kind face and a gentle voice. I looked at his hands and checked for grease under the nails. I didn't feel the old familiar spark of desperation. I smiled politely and gave him the title of a mystery. Then I stood up and walked away alone. Vanessa was in prison. Logan was in a cell, and I was finally free. I liked the sound of my own footsteps.